Redditors who were almost murdered, what's your story? When I was young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, my family lived in a small town of about 1,200 people. It was mostly a farming town. My dad was the manager of the only bank in town. A farmer missed some payments on a loan, so the bank foreclosed and took his farm. This farmer apparently blamed my father personally, so he went to the bank with a rifle and threatened my father. My father talked to him, cops were called, and the farmer was arrested and arraigned. Bail was posted for the farmer, so he was released from jail. A few days later, my family was eating dinner and we heard a truck pull up and park in front of our house. It was a really quiet street in a small town, so my father went to the front window to see who pulled up. It was the farm, and this time he had a shotgun. He walked right up to the front door and knocked, and my family busted ass out of the back door and ran to a neighbor's house. Our front door was unlocked so he could have opened it and blasted us all, but I guess he didn't think to check it. Cops were again called, and the farmer was arrested. My family spent the next week or so in a hotel a few towns away until it was assured that the farmer would be in jail without the possibility of bail. I was a freshman in college and, in my first semester, pledged a fraternity. One night, I was assigned to work the door at a party, which was not uncommon. Around 1:30 to 2 a.m., a group of guys that worked at the dining hall, I remembered the one because he made an amazing cheesesteak, showed up and each paid $5 per cup. A few minutes after they paid, the last keg kicked and none of them got any beer. As soon as they told me that the kegs just kicked, I started counting out cash to pay them back for the cups that they bought. Before I could get them their money back, one of my drunk pledge brothers decided to physically force them out the door while yelling/shit-talking them. As soon as I could calm my buddy down, I went outside to give them their cash back, only to be met with a big surprise. When I made it down the back steps, cheesesteak guy aggressively steps forward and says, "Y'all made a big fucking mistake." I'm strapped as a motherfucker, pulls a handgun out of his waistband and points it directly between my eyes. In that moment, it was remarkable that 18-year-old me didn't shit his pants immediately. A few of the older guys in the house stepped outside and were able to talk the guy down without incident, but it felt like I had that gun pointed between my eyes for an eternity. Long story short, I was incredibly lucky that I didn't get shot that night. Needless to say, I went without cheesesteaks for a few semesters after that night. My brother struggled with mental health issues his entire life. When I was really young, he pushed me into the deep end of the pool knowing I couldn't swim and walked away. They found me floating face down in the pool shortly after and had to resuscitate me. Years later, he took his own life. Mental health issues are not to be ignored. This is my aunt's story, but it's too good to not share. My aunt was almost killed by the famous serial killer Michael Swango, the killer doctor. She worked as a unit secretary at the ward he worked in regularly and they knew each other well. Part of his routine was poisoning people he worked with, and he admitted, after he was caught, he was planning on killing her, but his co-workers got suspicious of him and he left town before he had the chance. Maybe a little bit of a stretch, but my closest brush working at a university, guy called the office saying he used to attend, wanted to re-enroll, but had such a strange set of circumstances that he was elevated to me. After a few minutes, I could tell something was off. Turns out he was mentally unsound, and calling from a mental care hospital. He sounded like he just wanted to chat, and seemed lonely, so his S were always sent to me. He ended up calling once a week or so, and mostly just prattled on about nothing, but sometimes would drop something extra wild. He told me he was secretly Jesus Christ, he'd actually helped found the university, that he owned the city's baseball team, that he knew a secret word at a store in the mall that would get me free soap for life. Anyway, I talked to him each time he called and thought I was helping a lonely old man. After about 6 months of it, I got a call from campus safety, telling me my dad was on campus to visit but couldn't find my office. My dad lives states away, so I obviously knew something was up. I could hear talking in the background, and recognized his voice. I let the officer know that this was not my dad, and that he definitely should not be allowed on campus. They were obviously suspicious, hence the call to me. The officer on duty ended up getting him to give more info. Turns out he'd been released from a mental facility that day for threatening a nurse with a scalpel, and then smearing his own shit all over her and his room. I'm guessing he wasn't there to kill me, but we were all pretty freaked out. He still calls every once in a while, and we just forward him to the campus officer who knows him. Last I heard, he called from jail. I was working at a gas station. It was at night and slow, so I was sitting in the office watching TV. All of a sudden, one guy comes in behind me, another guy comes in front of me. Guy in front says don't get up. I give him the wad of cash from my breast pocket, and then the money from my front pocket. They rush out back into the darkness. I stay put, just like the guy said. Then I call the owner. A car pulls up to get gas. I tell them they need to pay by credit card or exact change because I just got robbed. Then I reach up to touch my neck. It was bloody. The guy in back was holding a knife to my throat. The last time I saw my ex, I broke up with him while we sat in his car at a park. After choking me until I passed out, he got onto the freeway and drove 100 plus mph while slamming my head into the window and dashboard. I was able to get out of the car at one point when he got off the freeway and ran into the street screaming, trying to wave down a car but no one stopped. He was forcing me into his trunk when a man pulled over and started filming him and I ran onto a bus. I won't ever forget how his eyes looked and that he was absolutely silent the whole 2 hours. I moved across the country after his mom called me panicking to warn me he was looking for me. I've told this before but I witnessed a murder directly in front of me while I was sitting in my Jeep with the top down. 2 guys were arguing on the sidewalk. I was just sitting there. They knew I was there and didn't care. One guy pulled out a homemade shank from his pant leg and straight-armed it into the other guy's eye. I will never forget the crunching sound when that blade went into his face. The murderer looked at me once and bolted. I ran up to help but the guy was fucked. Blood spouting out of his eye in gushes and he was moaning horribly. He died as the ambulance arrived. I was the only witness and nearly testified in court but the guy pleaded guilty and got 15 to 25 YRS. Still have nightmares about that 25 YRS later. I was a kid on a trip with my family and the hired driver had a mental breakdown and tried driving us off a bridge. Posted this story before on another thread once, but here goes. When I was in high school, a random new kid started stalking me. Like following me home from school, I'd see him outside my house, he'd stand by my locker at school. He was weird. Told my counselor but they didn't really believe me. Told a teacher I was close with and he talked to the principal. They said they'd watch out. After about a week my boyfriend was pissed the school wasn't helping me. He confronted this kid and they almost physically fought. Finally, he got kicked out of school and about a month later, less than 3 miles from my house, he strangled a girl my age, who also went to my school, and dumped her body in a field. I was about 18, female, and just moved to the city for university. Driving near downtown and I see police lights behind me. I pulled over and a man in plain clothes gets out of an unmarked car and when he is close to my window I see another man getting out the passenger side also in plain clothes walking up to the other side of my car. I freaked and floored it out of there. I think I ran over their foot then I went the wrong way down several one-way streets and ended up driving an hour away in one direction cause I was afraid they would follow me. I called the police to make sure they hadn't actually pulled me over, which they hadn't. They never found the guys. My ex-stepfather is bipolar. After my mom left him, he had another manic episode. He broke in and pulled a gun on us. Told me to go to my room and not to call the police. I was 11. I called the police. When they pulled up he shot through the door to my bedroom and emptied the clip. I had already grabbed my cat and was outside under the deck. I am just glad he shut the door and not my mom. My one-half sister was born later that year. At her funeral he showed up and kept trying to talk to me. He couldn't understand why I refused. He was never charged and has no memory of the incident. He spent a weekend at a mental hospital and then was released to go to work as a teacher. I don't understand how all this was ignored and he was considered an upstanding teacher and person. I was 13 years old. My friend and I were out skateboarding, and for some reason this one woman got really angry that we skated on the sidewalk in front of her house. She began screaming incoherently and we just laughed it off and kept going. My friend went one way and I went another. A minute later, I am still just riding on the sidewalk to get back to my house when all of a sudden the woman yelling from before pulls up beside me in her car and starts screaming again. Full disclosure, I replied with some expletives and told her to get away. I continued riding and she just drove slowly beside me while continuing to scream. The woman eventually drove off, but then she did a turn and came back towards me. I expected her to just pass by and go home, but then I noticed she was actually driving directly at me. I froze and just watched her car come at me. Eventually my brain decided I had to move. It was literally like a movie and I dove away just as the car drove over where I was standing. I don't know her exact speed, but if I had to guess it was 30 to 40 miles per hour. She just continued driving and I sprinted home. She was later arrested and pleaded guilty to assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill. My ex and I got into an argument because he had become abusive and I told him I was going to tell his family what he'd been doing. He got so angry at that he tried to grab me booty, ran out of the room. He headed for the gun closet, so went outside to make sure when he killed me, the neighbors would see it. I called 911 outside and for some lucky reason they were just blocks away. When they got there he was in the middle of loading the Remy 700. I pressed charges and he only got 1 night in jail. His dad bailed him out and despite me getting a 5-year restraining order, LD run into him around town. He pleaded no contest and got 3 years probation. That's it. I moved 3,000 miles away but I still fear him. Was out one night with friends. An acquaintance was being super creepy, following me around all night, and generally giving me bad vibes. I had one friend offer to distract him while another walked me out to my car. Totally took them up on that. The next day I heard he ended up killing the guy that distracted him. I'm never living that one down. I feel like if I had not agreed to let him distract the guy, things would have gone very differently. For better, or worse, I do not know, but my friend might be alive still. Nobody blames me for it. Dude was crazy. It's just that what if I did something differently thing that runs through my mind. Survivor's guilt maybe. Not mine, and I never asked for many details, but my mom told me a few years ago that when she was in her late teens, she was abducted by a man in his car. She didn't stop fighting, and he let her out. When she told her parents what happened, they thought she made the story up because she was out past her curfew. Nothing ever came of it for the man. I remember thinking she was weird when I was growing up because she was always checking to make sure no one was hiding in her car, and was always on high alert for any strange sounds at home. A mentally ill kid in my school stalked me for a week and made plans to kill me. He said it was 'cause I made fun of him. Turns out he thought I was someone else. So there's that. The teacher said the video footage was creepy. I'd be walking down the halls and he was behind me, just staring. His plan was to put a shank in my neck. A teacher caught him before he stabbed me, and remember the kid left in police cuffs. When I was 12 years old, a few bullies at my school jumped me while I was walking home. We had issues previously, so I had it coming for a long time. They broke my right arm and several ribs. I was in the hospital for several weeks after. They ended up getting arrested for attempted murder. They even admitted that they were trying to get rid of me. I'm still undergoing therapy and refuse to walk alone without a form of self-defense. Came home, went into kitchen from garage. Saw all my stereo equipment, this was 1982, stacked by front door. Burglar shot me twice in the back. He was practically next to me when I walked in but never saw him, then took off. Not much more to say. Once when I was 12, my parents and I were on a hike. We were almost back to the car, and there was a drop-off to the left. All of a sudden, a bullet whizzed literally right by my head. It was close enough that I could hear it going by my ear. Several more bullets came by. We had to duck and run the remaining quarter mile. Turns out some dumb military kids posted their targets above their heads pointing up to a hiking trail. It was technically an emergency access road, but local folks used it to hike on frequently, to the point you couldn't hike it without running into at least one other group. I've never seen my dad yell at someone like he yelled at them. About 10 years ago, 5 men I've never met before decided to beat the living shit out of me. I tried to run. When there was nowhere to go, I tried to defend myself and was knocked out cold pretty fast. I'm pretty sure they thought I was dead because when I was noticed he was still passed out, don't know for how long. Turns out my former friend's wife thought her husband was paying a bit too much attention to me and decided to give some guys booze in exchange for taking care of me. I don't know if this counts as an almost because you never know how far your abuser was willing to go. But when I was a kid, I pissed my dad off and he started strangling me. Like, really strangling me. I don't know what made him eventually stop, but I am glad to be alive and okay. I even thought it was my fault for years, but there's no excuse for a grown man to try to strangle an 11-year-old girl to death because she wouldn't stop whining about a toy she wanted. We were playing tag, and some kid was it, and he was trying to run away from him. As he was closing by, I ran to this truck nearby, parked on the road. Then he looked left, and tried to push me out on the road. Me, who was too busy trying to avoid him, got hit by a car. The kid laughed his ass off while I was screaming in pain, and he stopped laughing when the person who hit me yelled at the kid, "What is so fucking funny about this horrible situation?" I think I did tell the police about how the kid tried to lure me out, and the dude who hit me confessed there was a kid laughing when he got out of the car. The police only pressed charge against the person who hit me, and did not do anything about the kid. Our family moved to a different city right after when I got out of the hospital. My now ex-boyfriend wanted a gun. I grew up shooting and know enough about guns and gun safety to know he wasn't mature enough for a gun. I told him not to get one. But on his 21st birthday, he went out and bought one. He was so proud of that thing, and would constantly take it apart and clean it. One night, he's sitting on the couch, across the room from the TV, cleaning his gun at a long end of the coffee table. I'm perpendicular to him, sitting on the floor, crafting at a short end of same coffee table. Suddenly, the gun goes off. I freak the fuck out. My ex is sitting there, looking stunned. He shot the goddamned cable box. For some stupid fucking reason, he thought it was a good idea to point the gun and dry fire it. He was convinced it was unloaded. He initially aimed it at my head. One was engrossed in my crafting and didn't notice, thought better of that and aimed it at the TV. Thought better of that and aimed it at the cable box and fucking shot it. It went through the cable box, then through the walls parallel to a long halfway and ended up in a closet wall. Fortunately, none of the rooms were occupied and it didn't go into an adjacent apartment. I was expecting police to show up, but none ever did. That fucker almost shot me, and I was too dumb to nope the fuck out of the relationship for a couple more years. So I was backpacking in South America and was getting a bus between cities in Brazil. As you may know, night buses are routinely robbed and I was unlucky enough to be on a bus at this time. Being the only foreign person on the bus, they obviously rinsed me dry. Passport, cash, phone all gone. I was then locked in the luggage compartment till they had left the scene. All while having a gun pointed at me. Now that sucked. What sucked even more was a week later when I was getting another bus and it was robbed again. Again they went straight to the only foreign person on the bus who didn't speak Portuguese and demanded all the stuff the previous robbers stole off me. I was pretty much crying with a gun in my face as I had nothing to give them. They took me outside the bus and I thought for sure I was going to be killed, but again they locked me in the luggage compartment while they robbed everyone else. I booked flights from then onwards. I was staying at the Extended Stay America in Brooklyn Center, MN, in the summer of 2018. Had my dog outside to go potty and as I was walking her back inside, a car pulls up and stops. Just before I can open the door I hear, "Hey, nice dog." I turn around and see some dude step out and literally pull out a knife. I don't say a word, tell my dog to jump, grab her mid-jump, run inside and slam the door shut, breaking the lock into the engaged position in the process. The building was and still is incredibly worn down and barely held together with toothpick-level materials. I sprint to my room and unlock the door with the card key. Just as I walk in I look out the exterior window in the hallway and see the dude actually looking into the building to presumably see which room I'm staying in. I get into my room, lock the door behind me, call the front desk and simply say that the back door to the building's lock is busted. Oh, and that also some dude in the back area parking lot is walking around with a knife. I hear the clerk say again. All right, I'll call the police in. TLDR, nearly got shanked because I was walking a Boston Terrier. TLDR, mom's ex-boyfriend couldn't deal being without her. Showed up with a gun. Cops called. First cop that responded got in a firefight with him and he killed that cop outside our apartment. Tried to get in our apartment but couldn't back, he was severely wounded by that said cop. SWAT showed up. Blew his brains out outside the front door. I've had severe anxiety since I was 6. I was in an abusive relationship that I couldn't find a way out of. I had done something to upset him. I think he didn't like the shoes I was wearing that day. So he tried to throw me out of the 3rd-story window. Luckily his roommate stepped in when he heard the glass break. It was the one and only time he did anything, but I think I would have died that night if not for him. I was pretty cut up but I didn't splat. I saved my 5-year-old sister from being raped by a family member and got beaten up so bad that I spent 3 days in a coma and another 2 weeks at the hospital. I was getting screamed at by my ex, as usual. I don't remember what I said/did, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me off the couch. He started hitting me, not the first time. LD never seen him so angry, and LD long since taught myself to not react and give him the feeling of having power for me. If I didn't cry he would get bored and stop eventually. Next thing I know he pushes me up against the wall and wraps his hand around my throat. I was having a hard time breathing, but still wouldn't cry. Just as I was about to pass out, I gathered all my strength and punched him in the ribs as hard as I could. He dropped me and before I could catch my breath, I hit him in the balls. When he was down I kicked him in the ribs a couple times and locked myself in the bathroom until he came and started his usual apologies. I knew I needed to get out and 2 weeks later, I did. It's been 8 years. My great-aunt's story, not mine. It's famous in my family. Her husband ran the one convenience store in town. One day she was stocking drinks and robber pulls a shotgun on her husband. She walks up behind him and tells him off. He turns to point the gun at her. Big mistake. She yanked the gun toward her, he fired and the recoil went upward enough to dislocate her shoulder, but he let go of the gun. She proceeded to beat him unconscious with the butt of the gun, and sat on top of him until the police arrived. It's almost like something out of a movie. Booty hear about that one time every Thanksgiving. Worked at a shop in a bad part of town. One of the guys working there messed around with some gangbangers girl. Dude shot up the place in broad daylight. No one got hit though. When I was maybe 10 to 11 years old. I was selling Girl Scout cookies with my troop that my cousin was in with me. We were in Tulsa, OK, at this strip mall that was in a U-shape. Most of the buildings were abandoned but there were a lot of newer stores open around it, so it was a high-selling spot for cookies. Well, my cousin and walked around the mostly abandoned strip mall and this tan car pulls up with 3 large-sized men in it. They pulled up and drove slow next to us and they start asking us if we're alone and one started opening his door to get out while the car was still moving. My grandma was right behind us where the strip mall ended and entered the main road and she started yelling for us. Well, one guy got out of the back seat as we tried to run away and luckily a cop pulled up in front of their car. I mean, he was a godsend. He came out of nowhere and those men took off so fast. I swore that years later saw the man that tried to take my cousin walking around that place. We haven't been back since and needless to say I quit Girl Scouts after that. I intervened in a fight between my parents that would have resulted in a homicide anyway, had the gun turned on me and held to my forehead. I said pull the trigger, Piglet, because that's the first thing that came to idiotic, depressed 17-year-old me's brain. It de-escalated the situation enough for the gun to be removed from the fight. I live in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. This one time I was at a bus stop near a drugstore, and there were quite a few people around. It was the middle of the day. Some dude pulled over right in front of me and shot at me twice. He missed both shots. Then he told me not to move and I was afraid, so I didn't. He got close and told me that if I moved he'd kill me. He patted me down, he wasn't wearing a uniform or anything, and then he asked me what I was doing there. I told him was waiting for my friend, which was true. I was even texting her when that happened. He told me to walk away and he did. A little bit of context, 'cause I know some people might have some questions. Where I live in Brazil, the police doesn't work. If I had called the police or something, they probably would have killed me too. This is not an opinion, it has happened to several people new. The police in Rio kills black men, period. In this kind of situation, it's better to just let it go and hope they don't come after you again, which is what I did. I've told this before, but when I was a kid, probably around 2nd grade, our house got robbed and my mom and I came home while it was in progress. For whatever reason, she decided to go in and interrupt them. She grabbed her gun, didn't shoot, yelled at them to get the fuck out of my house, and then we drove off in a hurry to the corner store to call the cops. This was before cell phones. Less than 2 weeks later, my mom and I are sitting in the living room on the couch, our backs to the front door. Someone drives by and fires about 6 or 8 shots into the front of our house. Thank God for a steel front door. The cops came and said they didn't think the two incidents were related. I met a guy who went to school with my sister, so I didn't feel like needed to worry too much about him. However, he got very weird after 3 dates, like asking if LD be friends with his ex, would he mind if he kept her nude pic on his computer screen, etc. I ended it quick and felt creeped out. He went into a depression and I promised to help him set up a profile on a dating site to just get rid of him. A year later he texted me and thanked me, said that he'd gotten engaged. 6 months later it's all over the news. His new wife didn't feel safe around him, so she'd locked him out of their newly bought house. He broke in and shot her, then took the gun to his head. They both died. I almost feel like I killed that woman since I started his dating profile, and I feel bad about being thankful it wasn't me. Happened 12 years ago and it still haunts me. Last time I talked about this on Reddit, people accused me of making it up, so I hesitate to talk about it again, but it actually feels good to get it out, so I'll give it another try. I'm not spending time on the details this time around. In sum, my roommate drugged me and almost killed me, but he actually didn't want me dead and helped keep me alive. I didn't know I was drugged then, and thought I was very sick and that he was an awesome roommate for spoon-feeding me when I was unable to move, etc. Then he began acting weird. I got very weird vibes and I moved out in the middle of the night, skipped a lot of details. He is now serving 30 plus 15 years in prison for drugging, raping, and videotaping his victims. Some of the victims are still missing. I was in one of his videos and had no memory of it, but that's how I knew he drugged me too much and I wasn't just very sick. A long time ago, a dude asked me for a cigarette while he was walking home from work late at night. I was feeling generous, so I stopped to give him one. Then his buddy pulled out a pistol, old Beretta 32 or 380, and asked for my wallet. I wasn't about doing that because I was poor, had no car, and getting a new ID would be a pain, so L offered my cash instead, all $12 of it. He was pissed but took it. He then told me I had better run. Being young and cocky and unafraid, for whatever reason I casually walked away. He didn't like that much, so when I was about 20 feet away he popped off 3 or 4 rounds at my back. I started to run then. I actually got all the way home, 10 blocks or so, without incident, but when I did my girlfriend pointed out that I was bleeding. Hadn't he noticed? I had been grazed on my neck and had a small chunk missing from my ear. An inch or so to the left and I would have likely died. My ex tried to strangle me because I said no to sex. He's now in the Marine Corps, so that's scary. Listen to a local urban legend. Teenage me and my 2 friends went to hang out at a big local park. The rumor was that the street across from the park driveway had a haunted house at the end. We decided to investigate. The little street ended at a straight driveway covered by trees overhead. We pull in the end and start to look around. Then, a dude in full clan robes with what looked like a big shotgun starts from the other end of the driveway, walking with real purpose. Fastest 20-point turn I've ever done. Found out in some local online boards later then the local clan used that abandoned house as a meeting place, and that guy was probably the guard/lookout. Walking down the sidewalk in Akron, Ohio, city, with a couple friends. We were at some college parties and on the way back home. Nobody was around except for this one guy on the sidewalk, but it's the city so that's not unusual. We get closer and all of a sudden my friends book it, like full speed, into some bushes and cut into someone's yard. I'm like WTF, what are you guys doing over there? From behind a bush they start whispering frantically, get over here. Now. I walk over casually, I'm like, what's up guys? They pointed at the guy who was standing on the sidewalk not 5 feet from where I was a second ago. Then I see it, the guy had a ski mask covering his head, it was dark and I was drunk and he was black so I didn't see it before, and he had an AR-15 holding vertically to his body to conceal it. He was standing there like scoping out some house across the street, like he was about to do something super evil. I literally almost bumped into that guy. My parents kicked me out when I was 18 and the only thing I could afford was a super shitty apartment in a really shitty area. I lived on the 2nd floor and the guy below me was a psycho and also a heavy drug user. He constantly catcalled me and would come to me door to complain of me being too loud. I literally never was, but okay. My BF would usually spend the night maybe he was always worried about me, and one night I drove us over to my place instead of him coming over in his truck. He gets in the shower and I'm walking to the living room with a basket of laundry I need to fold and dropped it. It was full of towels so it was heavy and made a thud. Seconds later, a knock at my door. I'm wearing tiny pajama shorts and a tank top. I open the door and it's my good friend, Psycho. He starts losing his shit saying that I'm once again too loud and this was the final straw. I tried to shut the door but he pushed it open and threw me on the floor. He's on top of me literally trying to rip my shirt off when he freezes. I look behind him and see my BF standing there with a gun to his head. My BF is licensed and is legally allowed to have a gun in our state. He calmly says, please get up and out of my apartment before you lose something very important to you. Psycho does just that. It was terrifying and I know that if my BF had not been there I probably would have been assaulted and maybe even worse. I broke my lease 8 months early and got TF out of there. This happened about over 10 years ago. I was working at a group home for at-risk teens and one of the kids was trying to choke me and I presume trying to kill me. This kid was a teenager but they were the size of a full-grown adult and I was 90 pounds and 411. It was close to bedtime when my shift was starting and all of the kids were in bed or going to bed. They came in the kitchen with me, we said our goodnights but they were stalling to leave. Everything happened so fast but they attacked me, jumped on top of me and tried to choke me but I kept fighting back so it made it difficult for her to stay on top and really get a grip, but when they did get on top of me I just started screaming and some of the kids woke up and stopped them. At some point in this they poured gasoline all over the kitchen and tried to set it on fire. One reason why they freaked out was because they went on a long home visit with their parents and did not take their meds. The parents did not believe there was anything wrong with their child so for them the meds were not important, but that ended up being a deterrent to everyone. I was working at a gas station in eastern NC and it was in a pretty rough location. It sat in the parking lot in front of a hotel and the hotel was known for housing all sorts of people of ill repute, mainly drug dealers and addicts and prostitution operations. One night while I was cleaning the parking lot around the store and gas pumps, I saw a handoff going on behind the hotel and they saw me see them. One of them pulls a gun and shot 5 times in my direction. Fortunately none of the bullets got me. I ducked behind the dumpster and took off into the store after I didn't hear any more shots. Then there was the time I got jumped by skinheads at the same store because I was a race trader for working for Arabs. I have an ex who was extremely abusive. The last night, he had been drinking and getting high for a few days, and he was very paranoid that I would try to leave. I was in our room, and woke up to him standing over me with a gun pointed at my head. I was sleeping with a knife under my pillow by this point, so I just reacted, and stabbed him in the leg, which messed up his aim. I got shot in the left shoulder. While he was pulling the knife out I ran to the door but was hit again in the back, this time by him throwing a knife. He was always scary accurate with knives, better than with firearms. That punctured my right lung. A neighbor heard the gunshot and broke down the door, saw me lying in my own blood and shot my ex in the leg. He kept him restrained until EMS and police arrived. I don't remember much after the knife punctured my lung, but am told I was choking on my own blood and ended up in cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital. If I wasn't already injured prior, it might not have been as bad, but he had spent days breaking bones and I already had a bad head injury from the day prior. Spent some time in a medically induced coma while my body healed. It was the knowledge that the EMS folks had saved my life that drove me to enter the medical field. Involved in organized crime many years back. Driving someone who had a price on his head and a van pulled up leaving a stop sign. Door opens. Lots of shooting. Took 2 to the chest/shoulder area. 1 passenger died and the other one also took a few rounds. Have since reformed pretty radically and am loving life. I was in a violent relationship where drugs and alcohol were involved. My partner went through my phone and found an app that her perceived as a dating app on my phone. It was called FML, kinda like funny stories from people, nothing where I could even communicate with someone to cheat. He sat me in a chair and held a knife to my neck and screamed questions about the person I had cheated on him with, and as I had nothing to say. After this I was hit multiple times, thrown, and finally had a heavy object thrown at my head, where I passed out. I woke up to him dragging me into the bathroom where he had filled a bath to drown me in. Our daughter was crying so I sat up to hold her, and he stomped off and slammed a door. Probably the closest he came to killing me. When I was around 4 my mom brought me to a party she was attending, totally irresponsible I know. She sadly wasn't the only parent that brought kids. While the adults were busy drinking and partying, 2 brothers around ages 6 and 9 lured me to the pool out back and blocked the back door. They drowned me in the pool on purpose. I still slightly remember the older brother smiling with glee as I struggled. The only reason what happened was even noticed is because someone walked into the kitchen to get something and saw my body floating on top of the pool, and the 2 brothers just standing there watching me float. No one could get out back once they realized what happened, either due to them blocking the door. My mom was panicking trying to force the door open. Some lady there went upstairs, busted out a screen, and hopped off the 2nd-story roof to give me CPR. If it weren't for her I'd be dead. It was winter, and I was completely blue. By the time the ambulance got there, the mother and 2 boys were gone. The only reason my family knows the boys did it on purpose is because once I got home from the hospital had a high fever. I was really out of it because I either did die and was resuscitated or was very close to death. My body was going through the shock of what had happened. My grandparents, whom I lived with, called my great-aunt, grandma's sister, to come up for comfort and support. We were all close to each other, and my great-aunt was worried too. I guess I randomly got out of bed while my grandma and great-aunt were in the living room worrying and talking late at night. I stood up on the fireplace mantel, eyes closed, and told them exactly what happened to me in great detail. Then turned around and went back to bed. It scared the hell out of them. I honestly wouldn't even believe this story if it wasn't me in the story.